Maybe the best thing for Ron DeSantis was getting the F away from the presidential race. You see, we all talked about how much we liked the guy before he decided to run. And I'm not talking about when he announced he was running, when he decided to run. The point at which we all knew he had made moves to run for president is when things started going salty. And then his supporters they went nuts on the internet. Really soured things for him. But now you take a look at what's going on in Florida, and you're like, Ron DeSantis is based. Very based. Check out the story from NBC News. Florida bars transgender people from changing the sex on their driver's licenses. State Rep Anna Escamani, a Democrat, said the move is another example of state agency being weaponized to attack trans people. First, I ask, for what is the purpose of putting your biological sex on your driver's license? It helps identify you. Why? Well, I'll give you the easiest attack vector in the argument: medical issues. A person is collapsed on the ground and they're, and the doctor says this person is suffering from a male-specific issue, prostate cancer. Okay, I'm kidding. Medications affect people differently. Men and women are affected by medications in very different ways. Talked about this a couple of years ago in a SCNR video where we interviewed Dr. Deborah So. There was actually a law was passed in the 90s. When they used to do tests on painkillers, they would only do clinical trials on dudes. And then when women were in pain and be given the painkillers, they'd go, it still hurts. And they'd be like, these women, they can't handle anything. We know the painkiller works. And turns out the painkiller wasn't working because women and men experience pain differently. And then all of a sudden they were like, hey, I got an idea. If women are saying this painkiller is not doing anything and it still hurts, why don't we try a different one? And then they try a different one. And women are like, I don't feel pain anymore. And they're like, interesting. Drugs affect men and women differently. There's also a bunch of other issues related to if someone is suffering from something and who made this example? They were like, a person goes, oh, my abdomen, and they fall down and they're like, help, please. If the doctor doesn't know the sex of the person, then they're going to be guessing at what may be causing the issue. Perhaps it's a kidney stone. Anybody can get one of those. Perhaps it's a uterus issue or a prostate issue. Well, men don't have uteruses and women don't have prostates. So that could help them break things down. The doctor can say, it's not going to be any of these issues. He wouldn't even think of it. He'd be like, we're clearly dealing with a male or a female. Now, what if there is somebody who looks female or looks male, but is actually not? Well, that's why they'll check your identification to figure out who you are, to figure out as much as they can about you to properly medically treat you. But more importantly, it's about identification. If someone showed up with an ID that was wrong, you'd be like, this is not you. We're trying to figure out who you are. In some contexts, I think IDs are authoritarian, but in many contexts, I think they're appropriate. NBC News says Florida will no longer allow trans people to change their sex on their state driver's license to reflect their identity. A policy change that muddles whether trans people who have already updated their documents could face fraud charges for misrepresenting their identities. That's an issue. I don't think they should be criminally charged for it, but I do believe that they should be, they have to go and correct it. Imagine there is a women's only privacy issue. Let's say there's a sporting event or something like that, which Florida says, no men and women's sports. And someone who looks female says, here's my ID. They go, you're male. And they're going to say, yes, okay, you can't enter the contest, the competition. You can't go in the locker room. You can't do these things. We created these spaces to protect females, typically, mostly from males. And so that's why we need to identify you. Robert Kynock, Deputy Executive Director of the Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles, wrote in a memo to the department's executive director on Friday that the department would rescind a provision on gender requirements in the driver's license operations manual that allowed Floridians to change their gender marker on their licenses. The department doesn't have the statutory authority to enforce provisions that allow someone to update their gender marker on their license, according to Kynock. Florida licenses can now only be placed when they are lost or stolen, be replaced, or when a licensee changes their names, address, or restrictions. Kynock added the term gender in the provision on gender requirements does not refer to a person's internal sense of his or her gender role identification, but has historically and commonly been understood as a synonym for sex, which is determined by innate and immutable biological and genetic characteristics. A driver's license is an identification document. As such, serves a critical role in assisting public and private entities in correctly establishing the identity of a person presenting the license. Permitting an individual to alter his or her license to reflect an internal sense of gender or role or identity, which is neither immutable nor objectively verifiable, undermines the purpose of identification record and can frustrate the state's abilities to enforce its laws. Why can I not identify as 200 pounds of pure muscle? I want my ID to say Tim Pool is 6'3", ripped, 27 years old. I mean, what? I love this about the argument. For what reason does my ID have my age? If I can just identify as I wish, my ID should say Vociferon, Herald of the Winter Mists. Yes, that's right. A 3,726-year-old ice spirit manifest on Earth. If I feel that way, who's to stop you? The absurdity knows no bounds, my friends. The purpose of an ID is to say, here's when you were born, here's where you live, here's your weight, your eye color, your height. You get pulled over, they can say, I believe I am correctly looking at the individual who is driving this car. That's the other issue, too. It's like driving a car. Most people's IDs, it's a driver's license. A driver license. Oh, it depends on where you're from. You say driver's license or driver license, whatever. Yo, if a cop pulls you over, we want to make sure that you have that. Driving is not a privilege. I'm sorry. Driving is not a right. It is a privilege. It is a privilege. And so you have to pass the driving test if you'd like to. If you give me an ID, it's got the wrong weight, eye color, height, sex, I'm going to be like, this ain't you. But it looks like me. Hey, it ain't you. That's the point of an ID. The provision that governs how the department establishes gender for newly issued license won't change, according to a memo from Molly Best. Blah, blah, blah. Escamami described the change as another gross example of how every state agency has been weaponized. Dude, because you don't get special treatment does not mean it has been weaponized against you. Instead of addressing the property insurance crisis, this is what our state is doing shameful. It's unclear how the advisory will conflict with current Florida law and federal law. For example, the state allows trans people to change their sex on their birth certificate if they submit an application to amend it. Fill out an affidavit attesting to the amended birth certificate and receive a letter from their physician stating they have received appropriate medical care for their gender transition. I oppose all of it. Look, man, I got no beef if you're trans. You live your life. You do your thing. Keep the kids away from it. But I think it is imperative to point out we have these identifications not because of how you feel, but because of how we operate society, which is bigger than you. They say, under the new policy, trans Floridians who already have driver's licenses would be unable to receive a replacement license with their gender identity rather than their birth sex, even if they change sex on their birth certificates. It's also unclear whether someone will be able to receive a replacement Florida license with an updated gender marker if they've already updated their U.S. passport. My question to the left, there's like 7 people. So why are you so concerned about this? There's basically no trans people. So why is it such a big deal for you to change the entirety of the system? That's the argument they make. Why do you care so much? There's only a few hundred. Why do you care so much to completely overwrite our laws for what you describe as a small group of people? Does not make sense. In which case, we shouldn't. Misrepresenting one's gender, understood as sex, according to Kynoc's memo, constitutes fraud, which could carry criminal and civil penalties, including the cancellation, suspension, or revocation of a driver's license. They said driver's license. They used both. The policy doesn't specify whether a trans Floridian who already changed the sex on their driver's license would be committing fraud by continuing to use the license. In Florida, tens of thousands of people have legally updated their gender marker on their... I'll tell you. It will. You will get charged with fraud. You will be charged with fraud. Why? They're not going... Well, it's... Okay, here's how it could work. Driver's licenses, IDs, show when it was issued. And so if you get pulled over or stopped and he says, let me see your ID, and you show it to him, and he goes, okay, you're not male. You're female. That's apparently clear. This says male. That's fraudulent. However, this was issued in the period where it was allowed, hence no criminal charges. However, there's a possibility that they're going to say, don't know, don't care. I don't care when you did it. I don't care why you did it. It's illegal to do this now. You needed to go and get it updated. That's the question. Personally, I don't know. I think a lot of people would call for it to be made immediately illegal maybe a grace period of 1 week. Go to the DMV, fix your ID right now. Otherwise, you are using a fraudulent ID with bad information. There's a reason why they say it's fraud. If you go to the DMV with a fake address or a fake name, you're committing fraud. Falsifying a government record, they'll get you on fraud. They go to mention a stupid BS and don't say gay, which is a fake thing that never really happened. And I just want to say, Ron's getting crazy with it. Calls for Ilhan Omar's deportation, denaturalization, and expulsion from Congress. Like, wow. Jeez, Ron. A little too much for me. I mean, I get it. Ilhan Omar came out, basically said pledge allegiance to Somalia. So Ron DeSantis says to strip her of her citizenship. That's Florida for you. Look, man, Ron, you're doing better not running for president. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimcastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all then.